Are you ready for opinion? Are you ready for a different point of view, a progressive point of view?
The Republicans are simply trying to gain power, and they'll say anything in order to do it.
Get ready for a progressive voice, the voice of Samantha Clemens, right here on The Revolution, AM 1510, The Samantha Clemens Show.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's Saturday morning here on The Samantha Clemens Show, AM 1510 Revolution Boston. Thanks for joining us. This is the show where we broadcast from Cause and Effect World. I'm here with Aaron Donchin. Here to join this discussion, we are very pleased to have Richard Kazimer, who is with Ronin Media, and he is a regular contributor to Australian radio and has been on the air here in Boston as well. Richard, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and I think we've all learned a valuable lesson today that as Americans we need to work on our obscenities. We need to raise the level of our obscenities. We need to do more work.
That's your takeaway from all of this?
I think
we need better obscenities.
I hearken back to the days when I grew up in a predominantly Slovak and French-Canadian neighborhood, and the slang and the slur words were metaphoric. I remember the French used the term tabarnak as a term of exclamation. If you hit your thumb with a hammer, it was tabarnak. And what it meant was that they were referring to the tabernacle of a church. So instead of using the Lord's name in vain, they used a variation of the house of the Lord as the swear word.
So still referential to the religion. That's
so
very
interesting.
Creative. Yeah.
So I think, but my cynical take on this is especially with Ed Schultz. Now, I listen to Ed obsessively. It's part of what I do. But Ed Schultz used the same term about Michelle Bachmann a week before. No one said anything. So here it is, walleye season in the northern tier opens up. Ed's an avid fisherman. He has blatantly said, I'm asked to go and speak at various functions, and I'm not doing it because my weekends are short, and I want to go fishing. So I think what he did was he went to MSNBC, and they said, you know, Ed, the only way you're going to be getting a week off is if you do something stupid. Bingo. And this is his self-imposed exile. MSNBC didn't suspend him. He did this himself.
That is beyond cynical.
So his punishment is
so
he's sitting cynical, in a boat
Richard.
With a fly rod and a cooler full of suds.
So that, you know, what you're doing is you're saying that is why he said it. The question is it appropriate for people to get upset about it, though?
Absolutely.
Do you think that it is an appropriate word?
Absolutely. It was an inappropriate word. It has no bearing whatsoever on Laura Ingraham, on Michelle Bachmann. It degrades them to a level of being incompetent women, and it has nothing to do with their political leanings or whether they're in bed with the Koch brothers or not. Slurs are never equal opportunity. A sexist slur is never equal opportunity. When you call a man an SOB, that has more to do with his mother than it does you.
Exactly.
So for him to be using this, my question is, his wife Wendy is the brains behind Pa. Wendy sits there in the studio with him. Why didn't Wendy catch this? Why didn't he apologize for this immediately, or at least right after the commercial break? Why did it take so few days to do this, and then for him to do it on television?
I can tell you why it happened. Because they talked about it over dinner. They talked about it right before he went to the other room to bed that night. They talked about it.
Well,
like, she's not going to interrupt the show. Or sometimes, things pop out of your mouth and then you think about them later and you talk with other people and, people make the case. So I'm not that cynical. I don't think it's just so he could go fishing. I think Ed could have figured out a way to go fishing. And in fact, I think it's really interesting to listen to his apology. And again, maybe he's the best actor in the whole wide world, but I actually think this is worth listening to.
Good evening, Americans, and welcome to the Ed Show from New York tonight. Thomas Roberts will be here tonight anchoring the program, but first I want to take some time to offer an apology. On my radio show yesterday, I used vile and inappropriate language when talking about host Laura Ingraham. I am deeply sorry, and I apologize. It was wrong, uncalled for, and I recognize the severity of what I said. I apologize to you, Laura, and ask for your forgiveness. It doesn't matter what the circumstances were. It doesn't matter that it was on radio and I was ad-libbing. None of that matters. None of that matters. What matters is what I said was terribly vile and not of the standards that I or any other person should adhere to.
Okay, so Richard's being very, very cynical about this. Okay, fine. So set that aside. Set that aside. Whatever.
I'm being facetious,
Stations
of
and
course,
shows
about this,
do
but,
all of
I mean,
this.
come on.
For me, the more interesting point is how do we react to the word? Because I hear and see people using it all the time. And whether or not they use it in the media, I don't really care whether Ed Schultz said it on the air. For me, the more important issue is that he said it at all and that people write it on Facebook all the time. And, somebody put on, we have the little show thing on Facebook, the little write-up about this. And a conservative guy responded to comments saying, why is it okay for some people to use it against some people and not against other people? And the fact of the matter is, I tend to think that liberals are not as bad and vicious about their comments about people. And yet when I look to see the things that are said about Sarah Palin and Michelle Bachmann and a lot of the other women, they are vicious. And they oftentimes, to me, strike me as being worse than the things that are said about men.
Well, you use the language that you know. And this is a difference between someone who was a writer first and then got into broadcasting as to someone who was always in broadcasting, because writers know how to use the words that are effective and that hurt the most effective way. And they have a tendency to do that, although a lot of writers don't make the best broadcasters. If you've got somebody who's been on the air constantly with no accountability, like an Ed Schultz, like a Rush Limbaugh, they use the stale language that they use. I think the bigger question is, does Ed Schultz use this word in his own regular language? Does he use it around his family? Does he use it around his friends? You don't pull these things out of thin air unless you've used them. He must know this word, and he must have used it. If he slipped, if he's upset, that's okay. I mean, Ed's got a lot of pressure on him. He's doing 2 shows a day. He's got a tab probably at Katz's Deli, and he may have a chalky colon, so this may be the reason why he used it. But it is absolutely wrong. There is no justification for using that kind of language ever, period.
There are lots of slurs. There are tons of ethnic slurs that if you don't live in that scenario, they seem utterly benign. Somebody just called in and mentioned the word schmuck, which I grew up, calling each other that, having no idea about what the original meaning of the word was. There's another word that's currently in use that a lot of people have no idea what it means, and you're going to have to Google it, but teabagger. That's a slur. I had no idea. People were going around saying it, and it was actually a conservative guy who posted on my Facebook page saying, I object to being called a teabagger. That's a slur, and I actually had to look it up. I had to look it up on the urbandictionary.com. Now, Aaron, you said that you had a little bit of a rebuttal. I can't believe you're going to refute anything that I had to say.
Well, God forbid I refute the Queen, but
exactly.
One thing you're doing, and I understand the necessity to want to be sensitive to other people by using appropriate language around certain people. However, one thing you're doing is you're fitting that stereotype of the liberal who's trying to tell other people what to say and how to say it.
Have I said that? I have said I hate them.
No, you've inferred it, though. You've inferred it. You're saying, well, should we say this word or shouldn't we say this word? You shouldn't use slut because that means this, this, and that. So in a way, I feel like you're telling people what words they should and shouldn't say in front of you.
What's wrong with that?
Exactly.
Why not?
Well, no, I understand certain words are, in fact, offensive. There are words that offend me, but if there's no malice behind it, but someone happens to use it, is it really offensive?
Determination of the offense is not on the offender, but the offendee. If I use a word that is inappropriate and I don't mean it, but I say it, and you're offended by it, you're the one who's been offended. So whether I meant it or not, it doesn't matter. It's like racist terms. If someone uses the N-word, but they don't mean it in a racial way, too bad. It is used in a racial way. It is a racial word. These slurs are sexist to women.
They are at this moment in time.
They're not catch-all phrases.
And I think Gordon made a really good point, which is things change over time. Because as I'm looking on Wikipedia, which is the source of all knowledge here, and I'm looking at ethnic slurs by ethnicity. Do those resonate with Irish and Italian people? Do they feel particularly bad if they're called that? Now, maybe if they're called it in a joke or in kind of a benign context, they don't really care. But if they're called that by someone who they know truly believes that they are beneath them, I think that's when it hits home. We have a caller. Joanna from Tucson, you're on the air. Thanks a lot for calling.
Yeah, I was just going to comment and say one of the fastest changes in a word was when the Katrina people took offense at being called refugees.
Have those people who are obviously, they have no place to live right now because their homes were completely destroyed. Have they been called refugees or have they been called evacuees? Have you happened to notice?
I haven't noticed.
Yeah,
I've seen them called displaced.
Displaced. But that's an interesting question, is, changing in the meaning of the word. All right. Well, we've only got a few seconds left. So, Richard, do you have any final thoughts? Are there any words that you will no longer be using because
any of those words? And I carry a bar of soap with me all the time to put in my mouth. The upside is all the Nazis across America have breathed a sigh of relief that they're no longer the slander du jour. So you just
pointed a big finger on that one. Okay. All righty. Well, thank you for listening. Really appreciate everybody who called in. Obviously it's interesting stuff, but ultimately it is the idea. What I want to know, and if you know this, I want you to send me an email. Has Laura Ingraham herself ever used the word slut? And maybe I'll just have to grow out of it. Thanks for listening. See you next week.